The invitation felt like a summons, a return to a life she had barely survived. Naomi Hayes was walking into her 10-year reunion with nothing but a second-hand dress and a business that was barely breaking even. Her ex-husband Marcus, the man who had taken everything, was there dripping in designer brands and armed with a cruel laugh. He pointed at her, his voice booming across the ballroom, mocking her for choosing meaning over money. The entire class laughed. Naomi stood alone, shaking, until the doors opened and the most powerful man in the state walked right past her. X smiled and said, "Hi, sweetheart." The invitation was thick, creamy cardstock with embossed silver lettering. It felt expensive, which was, Naomi Hayes thought, the entire point. It was an artifact from a different world, a life she no longer lived. Northwood. High class of 15-year reunion. She'd been divorced from Marcus Vance for 3 years, but in the stale air of her small flower shop, petal and stem. The arrival of this invitation felt like the ripping open of a barely healed wound. Naomi wiped a smudge of potting soil from the Grand Oak Hotel logo. The Grand Oak. Of course. Marcus and his parents were members. He'd probably helped choose the venue specifically so he could hold court on his home turf. "You gonna go?" Naomi jumped. Her best friend and part-time employee, Chloe, was leaning against a rack of terracotta pots, sipping a lukewarm coffee. I don't think so, Chloe. What's the point? To see who got richest, who aged the best. Naomi tossed the invitation onto her cluttered workbench next to a spool of silk ribbon and a pair of shears. "The point," Chloe said, pushing her glasses up her nose, "is to walk in there looking like the goddess you are and show them that living well is the best revenge. Not living rich, living well." Naomi sighed, her gaze drifting to her reflection in the shop window. She was 33. Her face was fine, she supposed, but there were faint lines of stress around her eyes that hadn't been there when she was Mrs. Vance. Her hands, her greatest pride, were calloused and often stained green from stems her nails kept short and practical. She wasn't the polished, manicured woman who used to host charity luncheons. She was a woman who worked with dirt. Marcus had hated it. Their marriage had been a whirlwind. He was the high school quarterback, the golden boy from a family with good bones and old money. She was the quiet, scholarship-winning, artsy girl. Their union was seen as a storybook romance, but the storybook was a facade. The reality was Marcus's stifling control, his obsession with appearances, and his casual, cutting cruelty. The divorce had been brutal. He'd called her naive in court. "She has no concept of money, Your Honor. She wanted to open a flower shop." His lawyers had painted her as unstable, a dreamer incapable of existing in the real world he dominated. He'd kept the high-rise condo, the stocks, the country club membership. Naomi had walked away with her small savings and a fractured sense of self. She'd poured everything into petal and stem. It wasn't just a shop, it was her sanctuary. She didn't just sell flowers, she sold comfort. She made grief bouquets for the widowed and hope arrangements for new mothers. Her work had meaning, but meaning didn't pay the escalating rent on her storefront. She was struggling, deeply, and Marcus knew it. He still had friends who reported back, and she had no doubt he was eagerly awaiting the chance to see her fail. "He'll be there, Chloe, with her." Her was Jessica, the 20-something paralegal from his law firm who had become his executive assistant and almost immediately his fiancée. She was sleek, blonde, and hungry. "So what?" Chloe argued, stepping forward. "Let him be there. Let them both be there. You are Naomi Hayes. You built a business from nothing. You survived him. You owe it to yourself to go." The conversation replayed in Naomi's head all week. Every time she delivered an arrangement, she felt the dread. Every time she paid a bill, she felt the inadequacy. The reunion was a stage, and she was being forced to perform a role she didn't want, the failed ex-wife. On Friday, the night before the event, she found herself in a high-end consignment shop. She couldn't afford a new dress from the boutiques she used to frequent. She combed the racks, her fingers brushing past sequins and silk. And then she saw it. A simple navy blue sheath dress. It wasn't flashy. It had no designer label she recognized. But it was elegant, timeless, and most importantly on the 70% off rack. It's perfect, she whispered. It was the dress of a woman who wasn't trying to impress anyone. A woman who was simply herself. She bought the dress a pair of matching heels from a discount store and decided she would go. Not for them, not for Marcus, but for the woman who worked with dirt and built a life however small from the ashes of her old one. She would walk in, have one glass of mediocre champagne, and walk out with her head held high. That was the plan anyway. Plans, as she well knew, had a way of falling apart when they made contact with Marcus Vance. The Grand Oak Hotel smelled like old money and lilies. The scent, a cloying funereal aroma, hit Naomi the moment she stepped out of her 10-year-old Honda Civic. The valet, a young man with a carefully neutral expression, had looked at her car with a flicker of disdain before turning his attention to the gleaming black Porsche that pulled up behind her. Naomi clutched her small borrowed purse and walked under the grand portico. The Northwood High 15-year reunion sign was professionally printed, pointing her toward the main ballroom. Her heart wasn't just beating, it was hammering a trapped bird against her ribs. The navy dress felt good, but as she saw other women emerging from Escalades and Teslas draped in shimmering fabrics and dripping with diamonds, her simple sheath suddenly felt like a school uniform. She pushed open the heavy oak doors to the ballroom. The noise hit her first. A wave of loud chatter, shrill laughter, and the dull thud of a generic 2000s pop-punk song. The room was vast, dominated by a massive crystal chandelier that cast a glittering, unforgiving light on everyone. Groups were clustered like islands, clutching drinks, their heads swiveling, scanning and assessing. It was high school, but with more expensive alcohol. Naomi grabbed a flute of champagne from a passing waiter's tray and retreated to a corner, positioning herself behind a large potted palm. She took a sip. It tasted as cheap as she'd expected. Naomi Hayes, is that you?" Naomi stiffened. She turned to see Sarah Jenkins, now Sarah Petrov. In high school, Sarah had been the head of the gossip mill. Now she looked like she'd been sculpted from beige marble. Her blonde hair was pulled into a severe bun, her dress was a tight bandage-style number, and a formidable diamond ring glittered on her hand. "Sarah, hi. You look exactly the same," Naomi said, attempting a smile. "Oh, you're sweet." Sarah trilled, air-kissing the space near Naomi's cheek. "I've just been so busy with the foundation. My husband Dmitri, he insists I run it. It's exhausting." She leaned in, her perfume overwhelming. "My God, it's brave of you to come. I mean, after everything. We all heard." Brave. The word was a scalpel. "It's just a reunion, Sarah," Naomi said, keeping her voice level. Of course. Oh, look, there's Ben." Sarah waved frantically. Ben Carter, once a scrawny AV Club nerd, had clearly glowed up into a tech bro. He wore a blazer over an expensive t-shirt, his hair artfully messy. He was loud, gesticulating wildly as he talked. "And I told the VC, I said, if you don't 10x this seed round, you're missing the boat." And they did. Ben boomed, joining them. He glanced at Naomi. "Hey, Hayes. Long time." "Hi, Ben." "So," Ben said, his eyes doing a quick dismissive scan of her dress. "What are you up to? Still in town?" "I heard you. What was it?" "Opened a shop." "Yes. A floral design studio. Petal and stem." "Oh, cute. Cute," Ben said with the exact same inflection Marcus used. "My assistant handles all that for the office. We use one of those big subscription services, FTD or something. Streamlines the whole process." "My work is more bespoke," Naomi said, her grip tightening on her glass. Right. Bespoke." Ben clearly didn't know what to do with the word. He turned back to Sarah. "Listen, is he here yet?" "Who?" Sarah asked, her eyes lighting up. "Marcus, duh," Ben said. "He just closed a massive real estate deal. Bought out that old shipyard complex. Rumor is he's turning it into luxury lofts. The guy prints money." "He's not just here," Sarah whispered, nodding toward the entrance. "He's arrived." Naomi's breath hitched. She didn't need to turn around. She could feel the shift in the room's gravitational pull. Marcus Vance had entered the arena. He wasn't just dressed, he was curated. He wore a charcoal gray suit that was obviously custom-tailored, a silk tie, and on his wrist Naomi recognized the watch she had almost bankrupted them to buy him for their 5th anniversary, a Patek Philippe Calatrava. And on his arm was Jessica. She was stunning in a sharp, intimidating way. Her dress was fire engine red and cut low, her blonde hair sleek and center-parted. They looked less like a couple and more like a high-stakes merger. Marcus scanned the room, a practiced political smile on his face, a king surveying his court. He accepted a back slap from one of the old football players, kissed Sarah's hand, and then his eyes found Naomi. His smile didn't fade. It sharpened. It became something predatory. He had been waiting for this. He disengaged from Jessica, patting her on the arm, and began to walk toward Naomi. Every step on the polished floor echoed in her ears. The click, Sarah, Ben, and a few others instinctively turned to watch. The music seemed to fade. The air grew thick and heavy. This wasn't a reunion. It was an execution. And she was the one on the scaffold. Marcus stopped a few feet from Naomi, a theatrical look of surprise on his face. He held a glass of what looked like expensive scotch, the ice clinking softly. "Well, well, Naomi Hayes, I honestly didn't think you'd have the nerve." His voice was exactly as she remembered, smooth, confident, and dripping with condescension. It was the same voice he'd used to tell her she was too sensitive when she cried, the same voice he'd used to charm the judge at their divorce hearing. "Hello, Marcus," Naomi said. Her own voice sounded thin, a pale thread in the rich tapestry of the ballroom. "It's Vance," Sarah Jenkins corrected from the sidelines, giggling. "Oh, wait, no, not for you. How awkward." Marcus chuckled, a low, appreciative sound. "It's fine, Sarah. We're all adults here. No hard feelings. Right, Naomi?" He took a step closer, invading her personal space. She could smell his cologne, the same Tom Ford scent she had bought him. "I'm just here to see old friends, Marcus. Please excuse me." She tried to step around him. He blocked her path, a casual, almost lazy movement. "Whoa, hold on. We're just catching up. We haven't seen each other since—" What was it? Oh, right, court. The group around them, Sarah, Ben, and 2 other former classmates Naomi barely remembered, laughed. It was an ugly sound. "This really is something." Marcus continued, gesturing at her with his glass. "You here, at the Grand Oak. Must be a change of pace from that. What do you call it, your studio, that little shoebox on Miller Street?" Naomi felt the blood drain from her face. He knew her street. He'd been keeping tabs. "It's a good location," she said, her nails digging into her palms. "Is it?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Because I heard you were—" How did my guy put it? "Struggling with overhead. Sounds fancy for going broke." "My business is fine, Marcus." "Is it?" He pressed, his smile widening. He was enjoying this. This was his sport. "Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're standing here alone in a—" What is that, by the way? Is that from that consignment shop you always loved? The one with the sad-looking mannequins? It was a direct hit. He'd recognized the type of clothing, if not the dress itself. He was telling her and everyone else that she was poor. She was wearing second-hand clothes. Sarah Jenkins let out a tiny, horrified gasp, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. Ben Carter just smirked, shaking his head. "Marcus, stop it," Naomi whispered, her voice shaking. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, creeping flush that spread from her neck to her cheeks. "Stop what? Stating facts." He swirled his scotch. "I'm just making an observation. You're the one who is always going on about meaning. Remember that our last big fight? I don't want all this money, Marcus. I want a life with meaning." He mimicked her voice in a high-pitched, mocking tone. The group roared. "Well, you got it, sweetheart." He sneered, the term of endearment now a poisoned dart. "You got your meaning. And I got the condo, the portfolio, and a new fiancé who understands that meaning is a luxury you earn. He pointed over to Jessica, who was now schmoozing with a local city councilman. See that's a VP at my new fund, Vance Capital Partners. We just closed a $40 million acquisition this morning. We're flying to a private island on Monday to celebrate. But hey, he turned back his face, a mask of false sympathy. You have your flowers. Naomi couldn't speak. Her throat was closed. Tears were burning the backs of her eyes, and she refused to let them fall. She would not give him the satisfaction. She was trapped. The circle of laughing faces was tightening around her. Ben, Sarah, all of them. They were feeding on her humiliation like sharks. I have to go, she managed, her voice cracking. "Aw, so soon," Marcus said, blocking her again. "But the party's just getting started. We haven't even talked about the old days. Remember when we were prom king and queen? You were so full of potential then. It's a shame to see how it all turned out." He reached out as if to touch her shoulder. Naomi flinched, recoiling as if struck. "Don't touch me." The words were sharp, and for a second the laughter died. Marcus's smile wavered, his eyes hardening from cruel amusement to genuine anger. "Touchy," he said, his voice dropping. "Still the same oversensitive Naomi. You know I did you a favor. I cut you loose. You would have drowned in my world. You're just not built for it. You're small. Your life is small." He leaned in, his voice a low hiss meant for her, but loud enough for the circle to hear. "You're a failure, Naomi, and everyone here knows it. Now run along. Go play with your daisies." He turned his back on her, a gesture of final, absolute dismissal. He raised his glass to the group. "Now who wants to hear about the shipyard deal?" The group's attention snapped back to him, the alpha, the winner. They laughed at his next joke, their backs now turned to Naomi. She was dismissed. Erased. She stood there frozen for a long second. The shame was suffocating. She could feel the stares of other people in the room who had witnessed the exchange. She was the reunion's tragic figure, the punchline. Her plan to hold her head high was in ruins. All she wanted was to disappear. Clutching her purse, Naomi turned and fled. She didn't run, but she walked as fast as she could, pushing through the crowd, ignoring the few people who tried to say hello. She made a beeline for the exit, but her path was blocked by a sudden commotion near the main entrance. She darted sideways, finding refuge in the relative quiet of a small alcove that led to a balcony. She leaned against the cool marble wall out of sight and finally let the tears come. They were hot, silent, angry tears. He had won. Again. He had taken her one night of bravery and shattered it into a million pieces. Naomi pressed her palms against the cold glass of the balcony door, taking deep, shuddering breaths. The muffled sounds of the party, the music, the laughter felt obscene. She was hiding, just as she had hidden in the high school library when Sarah Jenkins started a rumor about her, just as she had hidden in her car after the final mediation with Marcus. A text vibrated in her purse. It was Chloe. "Chloe, how's it going? Are you stunning them with your brilliance?" Naomi's fingers trembled as she typed back a single word. "Naomi." "No." She wiped her eyes, smearing her mascara. She had to leave. She could take the service exit, find her car, and drive home. She would lock the door, open a bottle of cheap wine, and pretend this night never happened. She was about to step out onto the balcony to get some air when the energy in the main ballroom behind her changed. It wasn't a sudden loud event. It was a rapid decrease in volume, as if someone had slowly turned a dial on the room's ambient noise. The boisterous chatter faded into urgent, hushed whispers. The pop-punk song was abruptly cut off. Naomi turned, peering from her alcove back into the room. People were turning almost in unison toward the main entrance. Even the cliques surrounding Marcus had dissolved. Marcus himself was standing on his toes, craning his neck, an expression of annoyance on his face at having lost his audience. "What is it?" Sarah Petroff whispered, tugging on Ben Carter's sleeve. I don't know, Ben muttered. Brenda said there was a special guest, a donor. Brenda Miller, the former head cheerleader and self-appointed reunion queen, was practically vibrating with nervous energy near the doorway. She was smoothing her sequined dress and checking her reflection in a mirrored pillar. A donor, Marcus scoffed, rejoining the group clearly irritated. Who the mayor? I had dinner with him last week. No, Ben said, his eyes glued to the door. Bigger, much bigger. Brenda's been dropping hints all month that she was trying to get him. Him who? Marcus demanded. Patrick. Ben said, his voice dropping to a reverent hush. Thomas Patrick. The name hung in the air, heavy and electric. Naomi froze. Thomas Patrick. Even Naomi in her small world of flowers and invoices knew that name. You couldn't live in this state and not know it. Patrick was a ghost, a myth. He was a local boy, supposedly from their very own graduating class at Northwood, though no one could remember him. He had disappeared after graduation, gone to Caltech or MIT. The legends varied and emerged a decade later as the enigmatic founder of Patrick Dynamics. Patrick Dynamics wasn't just a company. It was an empire. It specialized in bleeding-edge AI logistics and renewable energy. Patrick had bought up half the state's commercial real estate, including the failing shipping conglomerate that Marcus had just bragged about acquiring a piece of. Patrick didn't just buy pieces. He bought everything. He was a recluse. No photos. No interviews. Time magazine had tried to name him Person of the Year, but they couldn't get a single comment and had to run a silhouette on the cover. He was rumored to be impossibly brilliant, famously ruthless, and pathologically private. And apparently he was a Northwood High alumnus. No way! Marcus breathed, his earlier arrogance replaced by a sudden hungry ambition. Patrick here. That's the rumor, Sarah whispered frantically, pulling a compact from her purse to check her lipstick. Dimitri has been trying to get a meeting with his investment arm for months. They won't even return his calls. This is it, Ben muttered, adjusting the knot of his non-existent tie on his t-shirt. This is the night. 5 minutes with Patrick. Just 5 minutes. Marcus was already in motion. His mind was clearly racing, the gears turning. He straightened his Patek Philippe, smoothed his lapels, and adopted a look of casual, confident importance. The humiliation of Naomi was forgotten, a mere appetizer. This was the main course. He'll need partners, Marcus said, more to himself than to the group. Local partners. People who know the infrastructure. My shipyard project. It's the key. He'll see that. Naomi watched this spectacle with a strange, detached sickness. They were predators, all of them circling a new, larger kill. The main doors of the ballroom, which had been propped open, were suddenly pulled wide by 2 hotel staffers in gold-braided uniforms. A hush fell. This time it was total. 2 men in dark, simple suits stepped in first. They were broad-shouldered, wore clear earpieces, and scanned the room with practiced, emotionless eyes. Security. And then he walked in. He wasn't what Naomi expected. He wasn't a flashy tech bro like Ben, or a polished old money type like Marcus. He was tall, dressed in a black Tom Ford suit, so perfectly tailored, it looked more like an extension of him than clothing. He had dark, unruly hair, sharp cheekbones, and intense, penetrating eyes that seemed to take in the entire room in a single dismissive glance. He didn't look like he was 33. He looked timeless. He moved with an economy of motion and absolute, unnerving stillness in a room buzzing with anxiety. This was not a man who hoped for things. This was a man who decided them. This was Thomas Patrick. Brenda Miller scurried forward, her hand outstretched, her smile painfully wide. Mr. Patrick, oh my goodness, we are so honored. I'm Brenda Miller. We spoke on the PH. Thomas Patrick walked right past her. His eyes didn't even flicker in her direction. He scanned the room. His gaze passed over the bar, over the dance floor, over the clusters of frozen, staring alumni. Marcus, Ben, and Sarah had formed a small phalanx, a reception committee of ambition. Marcus had his hand slightly raised, a friendly, welcome gesture, his local partner's smile firmly in place. Patrick. Marcus began, his voice projecting across the silent room. Marcus Vance, I'm so glad you could make it. I'm the man behind the new shipyard loft. Thomas's gaze swept right past him as if he were a piece of furniture. His eyes continued to scan, searching, seeking, and then his eyes found the alcove. They found Naomi. The entire world snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. The intensity of his gaze softened just a fraction. The hard line of his mouth relaxed. He changed direction. He began to walk not toward the stage, not toward the bar, and certainly not toward Marcus Vance, whose hand was still hanging pathetically in the air. He walked directly toward the dark alcove where Naomi was hiding, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. Time seemed to slow down and stretch. The only sound in the vast ballroom was the quiet, measured click of Thomas Patrick's leather-soled shoes on the marble floor. Each step was a gavel silencing the room all over again. Naomi couldn't breathe. She was pinned by his gaze, a butterfly in a display case. She watched him cross the 50 feet that separated them, his two security guards fanning out slightly, creating an invisible perimeter. She saw Marcus's face out of the corner of her eye. His welcome smile had frozen, curdling into a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. His hand, still half raised, looked ridiculous. Sarah Petrov's jaw was slack. Her perfectly lined lips parted in a silent O. Thomas didn't look at them. He didn't look at anyone. His focus was entirely, devastatingly on Naomi. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. Up close, he was even more intimidating. He was taller than she'd realized, and his eyes were a deep, dark brown. He looked tired, she thought. The lines around his eyes were more pronounced than they were on the phone. The entire reunion, 150 people, was staring. They were watching the reclusive billionaire who had ignored the welcoming committee, ignored the most successful men in the room, and cornered the reunion's resident failure in a dark alcove. Naomi could feel their thoughts. Is he going to have her thrown out? Does she work for the hotel? Did she do something wrong? Marcus, recovering slightly, started to move forward. Mr. Patrick, sir. I think you're mistaken. This is just... One of Thomas's security guards, without even looking at Marcus, put a hand up. A simple, flat palm. Marcus stopped dead, his face flushing crimson. Thomas's intense expression finally broke. A small, genuine smile. A smile Naomi knew well, touched the corners of his mouth, transforming his severe face into something warm, something human. He reached out, not to shake her hand, but to gently touch her elbow. "Hi, sweetheart," he said. His voice was quiet, but in the dead silence of the room it carried like a gunshot. "I'm so sorry I'm late. The traffic from the airfield was terrible." Naomi finally let out the breath she had been holding. The hot tears of humiliation that still stained her cheeks were instantly replaced by a new, overwhelming wave of relief. She gave him a watery, shaky smile. "Thomas, you came." "I told you I would," he said softly. He glanced at her face, his smile fading as he registered the tear tracks and the redness in her eyes. "Are you all right? You look upset." I'm okay now," she whispered. His gaze hardened. He looked up, his eyes sweeping over the frozen tableau of the clique just a few feet away. He saw Marcus, his face a grotesque mask of shock and rage. He saw Sarah, her eyes wide with disbelief. He looked back at Naomi. "Who?" he asked. Just one word. Naomi didn't have to answer. Marcus, his brain finally processing the scene, sputtered. Sweetheart, what? Naomi, you know Thomas Patrick." Naomi straightened. The simple act of Thomas standing next to her, his hand still a warm protective pressure on her arm, felt like a suit of armor. She was no longer the small, failed flower shop owner. She turned her back to the alcove and faced her ex-husband. "Marcus Vance," she said, her voice clear and strong, finding its power for the first time in years. "I'd like you to meet my My friend. Thomas Patrick. Thomas, this is Marcus, my ex-husband. The words ex-husband landed with the force of a physical blow. Thomas Patrick's expression went from concern to a cold, dangerous calm. It was a stillness that was far more terrifying than any rage. His eyes locked onto Marcus. "Is that so?" Thomas said. It wasn't a question. He took a half-step forward, shielding Naomi slightly. "Marcus Vance, of Vance Capital Partners." Marcus was completely white. The Patek Philippe on his wrist seemed to tick with agonizing loudness. You've heard of my fund," he stammered, his mind clearly scrambling to find a new angle, a way to salvage this. "I've heard of it," Thomas said, his voice flat and cold. "My risk assessment team flagged it last month. Over-leveraged, volatile, and based on projections that border on fantasy. My chief analyst advised me to stay far, far away. It was a complete clinical and brutal dismantling. In 20 seconds, Thomas Patrick had declared Marcus's entire career, his entire identity, a sham. Ben Carter looked like he was going to be sick. Sarah Petrov actually took a step backward, as if the failure was contagious. "Now," Thomas continued, his voice dropping, "Ms. Hayes looks upset, and I find her standing in a corner just after you and your friends." He gestured to the clique. "We're speaking with her, so I'm going to ask you once. What did you say to her?" Marcus couldn't speak. He opened and closed his mouth, but no sound came out. The king had been dethroned. The man who had built his world on public perception had just been publicly annihilated by the only man in the room who mattered. "Thomas," Naomi said, touching his sleeve. "Please, it doesn't matter. Can we just go?" Thomas looked at her, and the coldness in his eyes evaporated, replaced by the warmth she knew. "Of course," he nodded. "Of course. We have reservations." He turned, putting a guiding hand on the small of Naomi's back. He started to lead her toward the main exit, his security team falling into step, clearing a path through the stunned, frozen crowd. They walked directly past Marcus. Thomas paused for one fleeting second, close enough to speak without raising his voice. "Mr. Vance," he said. Marcus flinched. "You were wrong about meaning. It isn't a luxury. It's the only currency that actually lasts. You should try acquiring some, though I doubt it's an asset your fund could handle." He didn't wait for a reply. He and Naomi walked out of the ballroom, the heavy oak doors closing behind them with a soft, final thud. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in the room was the returning tinny sound of the 2000s pop song the DJ had finally frantically put back on. Then Sarah Petrov, her voice a high-pitched, incredulous squeak, broke the silence. "Oh, my God." Marcus Vance just stood there, his face ashen, his scotch glass still in his hand. He was ruined, and everyone had seen it. The air outside the hotel was cool and clean. Naomi took her first deep breath of the night, and it felt like she was breathing for the first time in a decade. The valet who had disdained her Honda was now practically bowing as one of Thomas's security guards opened the rear door of a black, impossibly sleek Bentley Mulsanne. Naomi slid onto the plush leather seat. Thomas followed, and the door closed, encasing them in a world of profound, luxurious silence. The car pulled away from the curb so smoothly she barely felt the motion. She looked at Thomas. He was loosening his tie, the hard lines of his face softening in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. "Are you really okay?" he asked, his voice full of genuine concern. Naomi laughed. It was a real laugh bubbling up from a place of pure, giddy relief. "I am now. My God, Thomas. Your timing. I told you I'd be there by 9, he said, checking his watch. "It's 9:04. I apologize." "Don't. Please don't." She shook her head, the adrenaline finally beginning to ebb, leaving her trembling. You heard him, didn't you? What he called me." Thomas's expression darkened. "I heard, sweetheart. It was presumptuous of him." "It's what he called me when he was about to be his cruelest," Naomi whispered. "And then you called me the same thing. You reclaimed it." He looked at her, his dark eyes serious. "It's what you are." They drove in comfortable silence for a few moments, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. "How did you know?" Naomi asked. "How did you know?" "About his fund, over-leveraged." Thomas shrugged as if it were nothing. "When you told me your ex-husband's name last week, I had my team run a standard background diligence. I don't like surprises." He paused. "The man's a peacock. He's built a fantasy on short-term debt and market speculation. He was going to implode within 6 months anyway. I just pointed it out." Naomi stared at him. "You had him run." "It's just protocol, Naomi. I have to know who is in my orbit. And," he added, his voice softer, "I have to know who hurt you." The immensity of his world, a world where a person could be run like a stock analysis, was dizzying. But the motive behind it, that was purely simply protective. She had met him on the worst day of her life. It was a year ago, 6 months after her business had almost gone bankrupt. A man had walked into Petal and Stem on a rainy Tuesday. Naomi hadn't recognized him. He wasn't a billionaire. He was just a man in a gray hoodie and jeans, his face haggard with grief. He'd stood in the middle of her shop, looking lost. I need flowers," he had stammered. "For a hospital." Naomi, seeing the raw pain in his eyes, had stopped misting her ferns. "Tell me about her," she had said gently. He'd talked for an hour. His name was Thomas. His younger sister Clara was in hospice. She had cancer. She was fading. He didn't know what to do. He was the fixer, and this was the one thing he couldn't fix. Naomi hadn't tried to sell him the most expensive roses. She'd listened. She'd learned that Clara loved the smell of the woods after a rain, that her favorite color was pale yellow. Naomi had made an arrangement of delicate yellow freesias for joy pine and rosemary for remembrance, and a strong, beautiful life, and soft, mossy green ferns. She'd called it Clara's Walk. Thomas had paid in cash and left. He came back a week later. His suit was dark, his eyes red-rimmed. Clara had passed. She loved them," he'd said, his voice thick. "She woke up for a few minutes, and she smiled. She said it smelled like home. It was the last beautiful thing she saw. Thank you." He'd stood there, this powerful broken man, and wept in her little flower shop. Naomi had made him tea, and just sat with him saying nothing. After that he'd become a regular. First it was just Thomas, the quiet, sad man who ordered flowers for his sister's grave. Then he started ordering massive arrangements for his office. "I hate the sterile feel," he'd said. "I want it to feel like this, like your shop." Patrick Dynamics became her biggest client, their weekly orders single-handedly pulling her out of debt. But he never acted like her client. He'd come by the shop himself in his hoodie, and they would talk. About books, about philosophy, about his work in AI and her work in emotional floristry, as he dubbed it. He was the only person who had ever understood her obsession with meaning. To him, it wasn't a flaw. It was a data point he couldn't quantify and was therefore fascinated by. Their friendship had slowly, tentatively become something more. The first time he'd held her hand, it had felt as electric as his arrival at the reunion. He'd invited her to dinner just last week. He'd called her sweetheart for the first time 2 nights ago on the phone when she'd been agonizing over whether to even go to the reunion. "You should go," he'd said. "You have nothing to be ashamed of, and I'll come with you. I'm an alumnus, you know. I should probably show my face once every 2 decades. She hadn't truly believed he would show. A man who ran an empire taking time to walk into a high school reunion, it seemed impossible. But he had. "Where are we going?" Naomi asked as the Bentley turned onto a private tree-lined road. "Dinner. I made reservations." "Thomas? It's 9:30. At the Grand Oak they'll be closed." Thomas smiled. "We're not going to the Grand Oak." The car pulled up to a small private airfield. A sleek silver Gulfstream G650 sat on the tarmac, its lights on the stairway already down. "Thomas," Naomi breathed. "What?" "The reservations," he said, taking her hand as the driver opened the door, "are in Paris. I'm told the bistro I booked has the best soufflé in the world. And I figured, you deserve the best." Naomi looked at the jet, then back at the man who just a year ago had been a stranger crying in her shop. "Paris," she whispered. "You said you always wanted to see the flower markets there," he said simply. "So let's go." The aftermath of that night was not a loud explosion but a deep structural collapse. The story of the reunion spread with the speed of a digital brushfire, but the social embarrassment was merely the symptom of a much larger disease. By 10:00 a.m. on Saturday, the staff at the Grand Oak Valet's waiters and event managers had already relayed the Patrick Vance confrontation to at least 3 different local gossip columns. But the true execution was colder, quieter, and far more professional. At 8:01 a.m. on Monday, an anonymous data-rich file was delivered to the regional office of the Securities and Exchange Commission. It wasn't a tip, it was a fully formed indictment. It detailed a precise pattern of leveraging unverified assets, misrepresenting liquidity, and basing entire fund projections on speculative real estate ventures that had not yet broken ground. It was exactly what Thomas had called it, a fantasy. The audit wasn't a question of if, but how fast. The investors who had been in the ballroom, the ones who had personally witnessed Thomas Patrick, a man whose market moves were gospel, surgically dismantle Marcus's reputation, didn't wait. The calls began Monday at 9:00 a.m. "Marcus, about that last capital call, we're going to hold." "Mark, listen, my partners are feeling exposed. We need to liquidate our position." By Wednesday, 70% of his liquid assets had been withdrawn, triggering a covenant breach with his primary lenders. The personal fallout was just as swift. Jessica, his sharp, ambitious fiancée, didn't have a dramatic shouting exit. She was far too practical for that. She simply didn't come home from work on Tuesday. A text message arrived that evening. "My lawyer will be in touch regarding my share of the condo and the funds I invested in your shipyard project. Do not contact me." The Patek Philippe was sold by Friday not to cover the massive cascading debts, but to pay the retainer for his new, less prestigious legal team. The shipyard loft project, his crown jewel, was seized. Marcus Vance, the golden boy, the king, was ruined. He was a ghost in his own life, a living cautionary tale whispered about at the country clubs he could no longer enter. Thomas had been right. He hadn't needed to push. He just needed to shine a light, and the rot built on arrogance and debt was plain for everyone to see. The lesser predators of that night faced their own smaller reckonings. Sarah Petrov, a creature of pure social association, was terrified. She had been seen not just with Marcus, but actively participating in the humiliation. She scrambled. On Thursday, a frantic 14-line email arrived at the Petal and Stem generic inbox. "Naomi, darling, it was marvelous to see you. You and Mr. Patrick. Just a power couple. I've always adored you, you know that. I'm having a small, tiny get-together for Dimitri's partners, and I need the entire house done. Think. Forgiveness and old, deep friendships. White peonies, orchids, whatever you think is best. Money is no object." Naomi read the email, a small wry smile playing on her lips. Chloe peered over her shoulder. Oh, now she wants old, deep friendships. That woman has the moral compass of a magpie. "She wants flowers, Chloe." "We sell flowers," Naomi said. She personally selected every stem. They were flawless, the most expensive and austere white orchids in her inventory. She arranged them in severe minimalist glass vases. They were breathtakingly beautiful but undeniably cold. They were exactly what Sarah had asked for a statement. Naomi had them delivered by a professional courier and sent a 4-figure invoice due upon receipt. She never replied to the email personally, and she never received a text about lunch. The transaction was professional, final, and deeply satisfying. Ben Carter simply ceased to be. His LinkedIn profile was deactivated. The rumor was that he'd taken a mid-level coding job back at some faceless corporation. The 10X man had been reduced to a 0. Naomi's future, however, wasn't being written by her past. It was being written in a 24-hour diner. The scene on the tarmac after they'd left the reunion replayed in her mind. She had said no to Paris. "Thomas," she'd said, standing at the base of the jet stairway, the engines a low, powerful whine. "I can't. That's your world. The jet, the bistro. It's incredible. But it's not me. I'm the woman in the consignment dress. And I'm finally okay with that. This feels like I'm stepping into Marcus's world, just a bigger version." He had looked at her, a strange, calculating expression on his face. Then he'd nodded, a look of dawning, intense understanding. "You're right," he'd said, his voice firm. "My mistake. I was trying to give you a grand gesture. I forgot that you are the grand gesture. You don't need rescuing." He'd taken her hand. "But I'm still hungry. Do you know a place that's open? I could really go for some pancakes." So they had ended up at the Starlight Diner, a neon-lit relic from the 1970s. Naomi sat in a cracked vinyl booth, her navy blue dress feeling perfectly appropriate. Thomas sat opposite, his $10,000 Tom Ford suit utterly conspicuous, and he couldn't have cared less. He'd ordered pancakes, a side of bacon, and black coffee. Naomi got a grilled cheese and a chocolate shake. "So," she'd said, dipping a fry in her shake, "my ex-husband thinks I'm a failure, and you're you." "He's a data point in a failed set," Thomas said, neatly cutting his pancakes. "He's irrelevant. Tell me about your new hybrid rose, the Clara's Dawn you were trying to cultivate. You were having trouble with the grafting." For 2 hours they talked. He explained the ethical dilemma of a predictive AI he was developing, how he feared it could eliminate human choice. She explained the precise meaning of aconite, a beautiful flower that was also a deadly poison. They didn't talk about Marcus. They didn't talk about the reunion. They talked about things that mattered. It was without question the best date of her life. Thomas didn't save her shop. He knew that would be an insult. He didn't write her a check or buy her a new building. He simply amplified her. The Forbes interview dropped a month later. It was a bombshell in the financial world. Thomas Patrick the Ghost was speaking. The journalist had clearly tried to get him to talk about his market projections, his next acquisition. Thomas had pivoted. "Your readers want to know my secret," the quote began. "My secret isn't an algorithm. It's a change in metrics. For years I measured success in zeros. Then I met a woman who was measuring it in human connection. My most valuable consultant isn't on my payroll. She's a floral designer named Naomi Hayes. She runs a small shop called Petal and Stem." The article continued. "I went to her at my lowest point, and I was trying to solve grief to win it. Naomi taught me that grief is a state to be moved through, not a problem to be fixed. She operates on a currency of empathy, of meaning. It's a metric my AI can't process, and it's more powerful than any line of code I've ever written. We're all building systems, but she's building solace. She's the most successful person I know." Chloe found the article, her phone shaking in her hand. "Naomi, you need to see this." Naomi read it, and for the first time since the divorce she cried. Not tears of shame or anger, but of overwhelming, profound validation. The phone started ringing at 10:00 a.m. It did not stop. It wasn't just Sarah Petrov. It was corporate HQs in New York asking for empathy installations for their sterile lobbies. It was a chain of hospice centers in California wanting to license her grief bouquet concepts. It was a publisher from London offering a 6-figure advance for a book on the philosophy of floristry. She hired Chloe as her chief operating officer with a salary and benefits package that made Chloe weep. She hired 5 more designers. She moved Petal and Stem from the small storefront to a massive light-filled brick warehouse by the old canal, a building she later learned Thomas had quietly bought through a holding company and leased to her at a rate just above market, so she would never feel like a charity case. 1 year to the day after the reunion, Naomi was in her new studio. The space was filled with sunlight, the smell of damp earth, and the low murmur of 20 students. She was teaching. "Don't just place the stem," she was saying, moving through the tables, her hands covered in soil. "Listen to it. The curve of a delphinium is about reaching. The weight of a peony is about acceptance. Don't force them. Your job is to find their story and help them tell it." The bell on the front door chimed. Thomas walked in wearing his familiar gray hoodie and jeans. He looked like any other customer save for the quiet intensity of his gaze. He leaned against her old workbench, which she'd insisted on keeping in the center of the studio. He was holding a small, greasy paper bag. Naomi saw him and her face lit up a genuine, unguarded smile. "Class is almost done," she mouthed. "No rush," he mouthed back, holding up the bag. "Grilled cheese, extra crispy." He just watched. He watched this woman who had been mocked for choosing meaning, now commanding a room building an empire from that very concept. She was radiant, confident, and grounded. She was not the polished wife Marcus had tried to sculpt. She was not the broken woman in the consignment dress. She was Naomi Hayes. As she laughed at a student's question, her hands stained with dirt, Thomas felt a profound sense of peace. He, the man who could buy and sell cities, knew with absolute quantifiable certainty that he was the richer one in the relationship. She hadn't needed his money or his power. She had just needed the space to grow. And he in turn had found the one thing he couldn't build: a home. And so Naomi's story shows us a powerful truth: the world will always try to tell you what success looks like. People like Marcus will always measure life by watch brands and bank accounts. But real value, the kind that lasts, is built from something different. It's built from integrity, from kindness, and from staying true to your own meaning, even when you're standing alone. Naomi's greatest victory wasn't the billionaire who came to her rescue. It was that when he did arrive, he found a woman who had already built the very thing his money couldn't buy. What did you think of Marcus's downfall? And what's the best revenge, success, or just being happy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love this story of justice and finding strength, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life drama every week. Thank you for listening.
Millionaire abandoned his pregnant wife for mistress years later. He begged on his knees. Picture a gleaming mansion perched on a hill, its marble columns shining in the afternoon sun. Within these luxurious walls resides a man who once held the world in his hands, handsome, wealthy, and worshipped by many. But beneath the polished veneer lies a dark secret. He callously abandoned his pregnant wife for a seductive new lover, trading genuine love for the thrill of infatuation. Years later, when fate's wheel spun full circle, life delivered a brutal lesson. Stripped of power and desperate for forgiveness, he fell to his knees, begging for the mercy he once so cruelly withheld. This is his extraordinary tale. They say everything that glitters isn't gold, and that truth rang loud and clear in the opulent world of Thomas Harrington. Thomas was born into an ordinary family in a small town in upstate New York. His early years were modest, shared with 2 younger sisters and a mother who worked double shifts at the local diner. His father had passed away when Thomas was just 9, leaving an emotional void that would follow him for years. Thomas vowed to change his destiny, to never again feel powerless or insignificant in a world that demanded influence and wealth. Propelled by a brilliant mind and an insatiable appetite for success, Thomas worked tirelessly to excel at school. He won scholarships, earned early acceptance, to a prestigious business program at Columbia University and immersed himself in the bustle of Manhattan. It was there that he first felt the heady rush of power students scrambled to partner with him for projects. Professors gave him glowing references, and recruiters from Wall Street courtside seats came calling. Thomas thrived on recognition, forging a new identity not as the boy from a modest background, but as the man who would conquer boardrooms and penthouses alike. By his final year at Columbia, Thomas had interned with a reputable real estate firm. He displayed a knack for reading market trends that impressed even the most seasoned brokers. One such broker, Adrian Mendez, recognized Thomas's talent and took him under his wing. Adrian introduced him to high-end property moguls at lavish parties around Manhattan. These events were hosted at some of the city's finest locations, signature banquets at the Waldorf Astoria and charity galas at Rockefeller Center. It was at these glittering gatherings that Thomas cultivated not only an unmatched confidence, but also a sense that nothing was ever enough. At one of these elaborate dinners, in a swirl of tuxedos and champagne flutes, he met Isabella Peterson, a gentle soul from a humble background, much like his own. She was a public relations intern, assigned to oversee the event's guest list. She carried no pretenses. Instead, she possessed a down-to-earth charm that drew him in. Her eyes flickered with an empathetic warmth he found strangely irresistible. Intrigued by her kindness and disarmed by her honesty, Thomas found in Isabella a reflection of the person he used to be. Soon they grew close. Thomas's relentless ambition coexisted with a true fondness for Isabella. He fell in love with her generosity, her unwavering moral compass, and the way she looked at him as though he was the kindest man on earth, even though deep down he knew he was far from perfect. The romance between Thomas and Isabella blossomed in the frenetic pace of Manhattan. Their relationship thrived on stolen moments amid busy schedules. Thomas rose quickly at the real estate firm, securing deals worth millions by the time he was 27. During the day, he navigated skyscrapers and serious business negotiations. In the evenings, he and Isabella retreated into a world of simple joys, paper-thin pizza slices in their cramped apartment, quiet walks through Central Park, or nights spent reading aloud from the New York Times, dreaming of a life they might one day build. Despite his mounting successes, Thomas's old insecurities lingered. Each time he closed a deal, it felt like a temporary salve to the hurt that festered from his poverty-stricken childhood. But that hunger for more, that need to be recognized and revered, only grew stronger. Sometimes, Isabella would notice him staring out the apartment window at the city lights with a longing that went beyond anything material. She didn't push him, though. She believed that his drive, while intense, came from a desire to secure their future and ensure they never faced hardship. It was during this period that Thomas made a colossal breakthrough. A billionaire property tycoon, Victor Rayburn, entrusted him with brokering a complicated international acquisition. If successful, the commission would catapult Thomas into the financial stratosphere. He spent restless weeks juggling midnight conference calls with overseas investors, forging alliances and strategizing with cunning precision. Sometimes, Isabella would find him passed out on the living room couch, files strewn across the coffee table, laptop perched precariously on one knee. She'd quietly cover him with a blanket and remove his glasses, worried about how hard he was pushing himself. When the deal finally closed, it was a triumph that made headlines in various finance publications. Thomas's name was mentioned in the Wall Street Journal for his ingenuity and vision. The company gave him a performance bonus that dwarfed his entire previous year's salary. With that newfound wealth, he decided to propose to Isabella in a grand gesture fit for the realm of his ambitions. He rented a suite at the Plaza Hotel overlooking Central Park, decorated it with her favorite lilies, and spelled out, "Will you marry me?" in rose petals on the floor. Isabella, overwhelmed, said yes without hesitation. Tears stained her cheeks as she realized everything they had dreamed of might actually be within reach. That night, they toasted with champagne, their future shining bright, almost too bright to look at directly. In the months following their engagement, Thomas poured even more energy into business deals, determined to give Isabella the life he believed she deserved. He promised her an elegant wedding, a dream home, and comfort beyond her wildest imagination. She, in turn, threw herself into wedding preparations, carefully selecting every detail from flower arrangements to seating charts. Their shared delight carried them through exhausting days. But beneath it all, a subtle shift was happening in Thomas. As investors and society elites began to court his expertise, he felt intoxicated by his own power. The lure of wealth, status, and the admiration of the upper echelons began to overshadow the humility that once endeared him to Isabella. Though still loving, he was starting to drift just a little. Little enough that Isabella barely noticed. The wedding was a spectacle of glamour and genuine love. Their families and friends gathered in a picturesque vineyard in the Hudson Valley. White tents billowed gracefully in the soft summer breeze. Through tears of joy, Isabella walked down the aisle in a simple lace gown, clutching a bouquet of lilies, her late mother's favorite flower. Thomas looked handsome in his tailored suit, his demeanor a blend of pride and genuine awe at the woman he was marrying. Vows were exchanged under a floral arch. Promises of devotion, loyalty, and partnership spilled from their lips. Guests dabbed at their eyes with embroidered handkerchiefs as the bride and groom sealed their union with a kiss. Isabella thought she had never been so happy, nor had she seen Thomas look so at peace. Amid the congratulations, the photographs, and the swirling chatter of well-wishers, the newlyweds danced their first dance to a soft piano melody. They laughed at the gentle teasing of relatives who urged them to start a family soon. But for the moment, children were the last thing on Thomas's mind. He was still riding the wave of professional triumph. While Isabella mostly cared about building a home filled with warmth, Thomas had visions of building an empire, vast properties across continents, an investment portfolio that could withstand any economic quake, and a reputation that soared among the most elite circles. He wanted the Hamptons mansion, the private jets, the membership to exclusive clubs. The depth of his ambition was boundless, and in the back of his mind, a fleeting thought whispered that if he didn't seize every opportunity, he'd slip back into the struggling boy he once was. Months turned into a year of marital bliss. Isabella discovered she was pregnant soon after their first anniversary. The excitement in her eyes was unmatched. She saw in the child a natural next step, a symbol of the life and love they were building. Nervous but elated, she shared the news with Thomas one crisp morning as they ate breakfast at the marble countertop in their brand-new penthouse overlooking the East River. Thomas's face broke into a cautious smile. He hugged her, but his eyes flickered with something unreadable. His career was skyrocketing, leaving him juggling meetings, travel, and negotiations at all hours. On the outside, he seemed thrilled, but he also recognized the immense responsibility looming. In private moments, he worried about whether a child would slow him down or hamper his pursuit of the next big deal. Guilt tugged at him whenever he felt even a spark of resentment toward the pregnancy. Yet, he reassured himself that love would conquer all once the baby arrived. After all, he had promised Isabella forever. As her belly grew, Isabella shone with maternal radiance. She decorated a nursery, carefully choosing calming pastel colors and plush toys from well-known brands. Including a cuddly teddy bear from Build-A-Bear Workshop, she wanted a real, heartfelt gesture for their first child. She also insisted on attending prenatal checkups, taking birthing classes, and reading countless books on motherhood. Thomas sometimes accompanied her, but more and more his phone buzzed with urgent calls or texts from potential investors. Their conversations increasingly revolved around money, expansion, and the unstoppable trajectory of his professional endeavors. Isabella quietly observed how his once gentle spirit had turned restless, as if he believed that love and family were hindrances on his road to unbridled success. By the time Isabella was 7 months pregnant, Thomas was firmly entrenched in high society. Invitations to lavish galas, cocktails at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and nights in exclusive clubs became the norm. He found himself rubbing shoulders with celebrities, major real estate developers, and even foreign dignitaries. At these events, he was no longer the eager small-town boy. He was the star, the man with the Midas touch who could finalize deals worth billions. It was at one such high-profile charity event for cancer research at the Mandarin Oriental in Columbus Circle that Thomas's path crossed with Veronica Hale, a striking socialite whose father owned a massive media conglomerate. Veronica was everything society deemed alluring, tall, poised, magnetic. She possessed a confidence that, instead of being cultivated, seemed to exude from her every pore. Known for her luxurious lifestyle, from traveling on family-owned private jets to flaunting rare jewelry, Veronica created a stir wherever she appeared. The moment Thomas laid eyes on her that evening, curiosity and fascination stirred within him. He knew the significance of her father's influence, how forging connections with the Hales could accelerate his career beyond even his wildest dreams. As they chatted over cocktails, he found himself captivated by her wit, her audacious stories of extravagant European vacations, and her easy ability to navigate the social elite. Veronica seemed to share Thomas's thirst for bigger, bolder conquests in life, unbothered by moral constraints. When she discovered Thomas was married with a baby on the way, Veronica initially feigned surprise but then laughed it off, remarking that wealthy men never truly belong to anyone except their ambitions. An unsettling spark passed between them, fueled by curiosity, vanity, and the rush of playing with forbidden desire. Thomas was simultaneously flattered and uneasy, yet he didn't pull away. The old insecurities reared up again, whispering that he needed to secure every advantage, both financial and social, to remain on top. Veronica, the media mogul's daughter, represented a direct route to more power. Thomas told himself it was harmless flirting, an act of networking. Yet, as the weeks passed, text messages and phone calls with Veronica became more frequent. They met under the guise of discussing potential business partnerships, though the discussions often took place over flirtatious dinners. Guilt rippled through Thomas occasionally. He knew Isabella was at home, heavily pregnant, waiting for him. He promised himself he would never go too far. But lines have a way of blurring when money and desire collide. Meanwhile, Isabella tried to be understanding. She believed Thomas was simply working to secure their family's future. She didn't push him too hard to come home earlier or attend every prenatal class. In her mind, love meant supporting her husband's dreams. And while she missed him terribly, she assumed his distance was simply due to the demands of his job. Never in her darkest nightmares could she have imagined that another woman was intentionally inserting herself into their marriage. The affair was a slow burn. At first, they were sporadic texts and secret glances across crowded rooms. Veronica would playfully place her hand on Thomas's arm during philanthropic luncheons or real estate conferences. He told himself these were fleeting moments of excitement, nothing more than a game. And yet, each time they interacted, the tension between them grew thicker. Thomas came up with rationalizations to ease his conscience. Forging an alliance with Veronica's father's media empire could give him unprecedented coverage and access in the real estate world. And if he had to indulge a little flirting, what was the harm? Still, there were nights he lay beside Isabella, listening to her soft breathing as she fell asleep, and felt a sharp pang of remorse. But that remorse never fully outweighed the seductive allure of power and the magnetism Veronica exuded. By Isabella's 8th month of pregnancy, her physical discomfort intensified. She battled swollen ankles, persistent heartburn, and a constant ache in her back. Thomas, engrossed in his double life, became increasingly irritated by her needs. He felt burdened whenever she asked him to accompany her to a doctor's appointment or to help assemble the crib. Eventually, Isabella, wanting to maintain peace, minimized her requests. She believed things would return to normal after the baby was born, that Thomas would refocus on their family once the demands of his biggest deals eased. Then came the night that changed everything. Thomas was attending a lavish birthday celebration for Veronica's father at a private club near 5th Avenue. The press was there, photographing the city's social glitterati. Veronica appeared in a shimmering black gown that clung to her every curve, and when she saw Thomas, she sauntered over, pressing close in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. His heart pounded with a mix of guilt, attraction, and the undeniable thrill of dancing on a precipice. As the evening wore on, the music and alcohol lulled him into a haze. Veronica led Thomas to a secluded upper lounge, away from prying eyes. In that shadowy alcove, the tension that had crackled between them for months finally broke. They kissed an illicit, electric moment that neither could deny. Guilt thundered in Thomas's head even as he kissed her back, consumed by a toxic mix of desire and justification. By the time he left the party, his mind was tangled. He tried to reason that it was just one mistake, one lapse. But deep down, he knew he had set a dangerous precedent. The next morning, an unsuspecting Isabella asked him to feel the baby kicking. As he placed his hand on her swollen abdomen, a wave of guilt almost made his knees buckle. He forced a smile, pressing a kiss to her temple, vowing silently to end the madness with Veronica. In that moment, he decided that whatever short-lived thrill he had felt was not worth jeopardizing everything he had built with Isabella. But fate, or perhaps the darker corners of his own psyche, had a different plan. Thomas tried to distance himself from Veronica, though it proved more complicated than he anticipated. She was not merely a fling. Her family's media empire was entangled with some of his biggest business prospects. To sever ties abruptly risked both heartbreak and the destruction of valuable alliances. Still, Thomas determined he'd keep the relationship strictly professional. Veronica had other ideas. One evening, she called Thomas late, sounding distraught. She claimed to have discovered alarming issues with her father's company finances, documents pointing to potential fraud by some of their European partners. Terrified her father would be implicated in a scandal, she begged Thomas to help her decipher the real estate connections. Worried about the consequences of ignoring her, and perhaps still enticed by her vulnerability, he agreed to meet her at her penthouse. Once inside her sumptuous apartment, she handed him a stack of papers. The conversation began with business concerns, but it soon drifted into personal territory. Veronica confessed that her persona was largely a facade. Underneath the polished exterior, she felt lonely, trapped in a world where genuine relationships were scarce, replaced by transactions and favors. Thomas listened, surprising himself by feeling empathy. When Veronica leaned her head on his shoulder, tears slipping down her cheeks, he placed a comforting arm around her. One moment of solace turned into another kiss. That night, Thomas tumbled deeper into an affair that wasn't merely physical, it was emotional as well. Veronica represented a world that thrilled him, a world unburdened by the demands of pending fatherhood. a world that praised him for his financial cunning rather than expecting unconditional support. He felt guilty for resenting Isabella's needs, but he couldn't ignore the thrill that surged each time he was near Veronica. Their entanglement intensified. Meanwhile, Isabella entered her final month of pregnancy. She noticed that Thomas stayed out late more often, claiming business emergencies. Her suspicion grew, but she pushed it down, attributing everything to his demanding career. She consoled herself that his financial success would provide a secure life for their child. Still, she was lonely. In her quieter moments, she worried about her marriage, yet she trusted Thomas more than she trusted her own fears. Then came the day Isabella went into early labor. It was 2 weeks before her due date, and she was alone in the apartment when sharp pains radiated across her abdomen. Panicking, she tried calling Thomas repeatedly, only to be met with voicemail. In desperation, she called a taxi and headed to the hospital. Thomas, meanwhile, was in the throes of passion with Veronica in a boutique hotel when he saw his phone lighting up. Initially, he ignored it, but something about the repeated calls unsettled him. When he finally picked up, he heard Isabella's trembling voice. She was crying, breath short, saying she needed him. In a flash, the reality of his life crashed down, overshadowing the allure of Veronica's bedroom. He dressed hastily, apologizing to Veronica before he raced out, feeling like a man caught between two worlds, one of genuine love and responsibility, the other of reckless ambition and lust. Thomas arrived at the hospital just as doctors were prepping Isabella for a complicated delivery. She was pale, sweating, and exhausted from her contractions. Relief flooded her face when she saw him in the doorway. He rushed to her side, gripping her hand as tears filled his eyes. At that moment, he realized he genuinely loved her, that she had always been his anchor. No matter how far he strayed, the delivery was long and strenuous. Isabella's blood pressure rose dangerously. Thomas watched in horror as doctors and nurses swarmed around her, calling out medical instructions. He stayed by her side, whispering words of encouragement. Finally, after hours of labor, they heard the fragile cry of a baby boy. The doctors laid the tiny infant in Isabella's arms. In that instant, a powerful wave of emotion washed over Thomas. He was no longer just an ambitious real estate mogul, he was a father, but the bliss was short-lived. Isabella's condition took a turn for the worse. She hemorrhaged and required an emergency procedure. Thomas was pushed out of the operating room, forced to pace the hallway in a cold sweat. Never had he felt so helpless, so terrified. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the money, not the prestige, not even Veronica. He prayed fervently that Isabella would survive, that he hadn't chased wealth and status only to lose the one person who truly loved him without condition. After several harrowing hours, the doctors emerged to inform Thomas that they managed to stop the bleeding, but Isabella would need blood transfusions and time in the ICU. Overwhelmed, Thomas nearly collapsed from relief. The next few days passed in a haze of hospital monitors and hushed conversations. The baby, healthy despite the ordeal, remained in the neonatal ward while Isabella recovered. During those days, Thomas had ample time to reflect, standing by Isabella's bedside, watching the machines that beeped and whirred around her. He realized with clarity how close he had come to losing everything. A gentle nurse placed the baby in his arms one evening, and Thomas felt the fragile weight of this new life. Guilt gnawed at him, sharper than ever. He had strayed from his vows, from his principles, and for what? An intoxicating affair that brought momentary pleasure and the illusion of more power. When Isabella finally woke, she was weak but conscious. Her gaze locked onto Thomas, cradling their child, tears gathering in her eyes. She beckoned him closer, and he pressed a tender kiss on her forehead. For a few days, they shared a tentative peace, bound by this miraculous baby and the near-death experience. Thomas promised himself he would find a way to end things with Veronica once and for all. He owed it to Isabella, owed it to their son, to be the husband and father they deserved. Yet, as soon as the immediate crisis passed, Thomas found his phone flooded with messages from Veronica. She demanded to know why he had left so abruptly, pressed him about a real estate deal they were collaborating on, and teased him with provocative photos that reignited desires. The magnetic pull of that forbidden world was still there, tempting him at his weakest moments. With Isabella still in recovery, Thomas rationalized that ignoring Veronica might cause professional fallout he couldn't afford. So, he told himself he'd respond just to keep things smooth on the business front. He didn't realize how those small concessions were paving the path to an even deeper betrayal. As Isabella and the baby were discharged from the hospital, life at home underwent a seismic shift. The once quiet penthouse now rang with the baby's cries, the shuffle of diapers, and the smells of formula and antiseptic wipes. Parenthood was exhausting, beautiful, and chaotic all at once. Isabella, still recovering from her near-fatal delivery, struggled with postpartum pains and emotional turbulence. Thomas tried to be supportive, holding the baby so Isabella could rest, fetching her water when she was breastfeeding. Yet, his patience was short-lived. Sleepless nights wore on him, and the weight of fatherhood began to clash with his thirst for professional and social triumph. Thomas found reasons, sometimes legitimate, sometimes contrived, to escape the domestic whirlwind. A late-night meeting with prospective investors, an urgent trip to finalize a property sale, or an invitation to a networking dinner that was too important to miss. On many of these evenings, he slipped back into Veronica's orbit. She offered a glamorous reprieve from dirty diapers and the piercing wail of a newborn at 3 a.m. At her penthouse, the lights were dim, the wine was chilled, and the conversation spun around luxurious holidays and million-dollar ventures. At first, he managed to keep up the facade that it was all business. But Veronica, like a skilled predator, sensed his vulnerability. She capitalized on his fatigue, frustration, and dissatisfaction at home. She reassured him that he deserved a carefree lifestyle commensurate with his growing fortune, that he shouldn't be chained down by fatherhood and household responsibilities. Each word she spoke fanned the embers of resentment that glowed faintly in his heart. Eventually, flirtation turned into nights spent together, and nights became weekends in which he claimed to be on business retreats. During this time, Isabella grew increasingly lonely. She was left with the baby most nights, barely sleeping, battling emotional highs and lows. When she approached Thomas about her concerns, he brushed them off or claimed she was just overtired. The tension between them escalated. Arguments flared over minor issues, bills, the baby's pediatrician appointments, even groceries. Isabella suspected something deeper was wrong, but she blamed herself for not being the radiant partner she once was. She told herself that once she fully recovered, once she could regain her old sense of self, Thomas would return to her in mind and spirit. But even though Isabella tried to fix things, the rift only widened. Unanswered calls, messages that Thomas claimed he didn't see, and overnight stays at hotels for client meetings became the new normal. Yet Thomas's bank account swelled, and the luxuries poured in: expensive suits, a new sports car, invitations to the most exclusive country clubs. He used real names like Forbes, telling Isabella he was on the cusp of a feature about young moguls to watch. And it wasn't an exaggeration. Forbes really did want to interview him about his remarkable ascent in the real estate world. That fleeting sense of guilt still lingered whenever he saw his infant son or caught Isabella's worried gaze. But he convinced himself it was a necessary sacrifice. After all, it was just a matter of time before he found the perfect way to manage both worlds. Little did he know, His house of cards was on the brink of collapse. The final push into moral freefall came one night when Veronica openly propositioned Thomas to leave Isabella and pursue a life with her instead. They were on the terrace of an exclusive penthouse suite overlooking the city skyline. The hush of nighttime Manhattan was broken only by the hum of traffic below. Veronica, dressed in a sleek gown, leaned in, her gaze piercing his. "You and I are unstoppable together," she said, her voice low and confident. "And you don't have to play the role of devoted husband anymore. Think of the business expansions, the media clout. We could conquer entire markets. I'll introduce you to the biggest names in Europe, Asia, anywhere you want to go." Thomas felt a surge of excitement and terror. He tried to deny the notion. Leaving Isabella felt unthinkable. She was the woman who had stood by him through all the ups and downs. She was the mother of his child. But at that exact moment, an image of a sleepless night at home flashed in his mind, the baby screaming, Isabella looking frazzled, dark circles under her eyes, the mundane reality of 2 a.m. feedings. And here, on this terrace, was a vision of opulence, a pathway to global fame and unlimited riches. Before he knew it, he found himself nodding, the words tumbling out with cold detachment. He told Veronica he needed time. He had to figure out the logistics, the financial arrangements, and how to handle the inevitable scandal. Within a week, Thomas had a confrontation with Isabella that shattered her world. He came home late, reeking of perfume that wasn't hers. She didn't scream or cry. Her voice was eerily calm as she asked if he was having an affair. Thomas, cornered by guilt and adrenaline, admitted the truth. He insisted he was tired of the arguments, tired of the monotony, claiming he'd fallen out of love. The words came out so callously that even he was taken aback. Isabella's eyes, already brimming with tears, clouded with disbelief and devastation. She pleaded with him, reminding him of their vows, the baby who needed both parents. But Thomas, riding a wave of emotional numbness, declared he was leaving. He said he'd make sure she and the baby were taken care of financially, but he no longer wanted this life. He didn't want to wake up to the smell of formula and the relentless demands of fatherhood. It was a moment that encapsulated his complete moral collapse, a betrayal that spat in the face of loyalty, compassion, and integrity. He left her standing in the living room, tears streaming down her face, clutching the baby in trembling arms. She begged him to reconsider, but he just walked out, the door slamming behind him like the final nail in the coffin of their marriage. In the days that followed, Thomas initiated divorce proceedings, listing irreconcilable differences. His lawyers swarmed over the penthouse, enumerating assets and liabilities. Isabella was given some money, which Thomas deemed more than fair, though it hardly compensated for her shattered heart and the sense of abandonment she felt for her child. The tabloids got wind of the scandal, though at first it was hushed by Veronica's father's media influence. For the moment, Thomas thought he had severed the past and stepped into a shining new future. He had no inkling of the karma that waited patiently to settle the score. In the immediate months following the split, Thomas reveled in his newfound freedom. He moved into a luxurious suite in one of Manhattan's most prestigious addresses, a place that soared high above the hustle of the city. He took Veronica on extravagant trips across Europe, staying at 5-star hotels in Paris, Monaco, and Venice. Photographers captured them attending high-profile social events, sipping champagne while dressed in designer attire. Veronica delighted in being the center of attention, and Thomas seemed eager to share the spotlight. Yet as he settled into this life of unbridled opulence, there were subtle signs that not everything was as perfect as it seemed. Veronica, though cunning and influential, was also capricious. She turned moody when she didn't get her way, throwing temper tantrums that bordered on childish. She demanded constant displays of affection and generosity, expecting lavish gifts and exclusive experiences. Thomas obliged, rationalizing that it was the price he paid for being with a woman whose father could open endless doors. After all, wasn't this the life he had always yearned for? A life of infinite wealth, minimal responsibilities, and global recognition. Behind the scenes, Thomas also noticed changes in his business dealings. Some of the old networks he'd built with close colleagues started to fracture once news of his affair and abandonment spread quietly through the industry. While Veronica's father shielded them from extensive media criticism, the real estate world was a smaller circle than one might think. Certain partners raised questions about Thomas's trustworthiness. A few deals fell through, citing unforeseen complications, though he suspected it was due to tarnished reputation. It seemed that not everyone admired a man who would betray his wife and newborn child. Then came a disturbing development. Veronica's father's media conglomerate began facing allegations of unethical practices, everything from inflated marketing numbers to quiet briberies of government officials overseas. Thomas found himself entangled in the crossfire when he was publicly identified as a close associate. Even though he had no direct involvement in the alleged corruption, the scandal cast a long shadow, sending shockwaves through his client base. Investors grew skittish, worried about negative publicity. At first, Thomas tried to downplay it, confident that Veronica's family could quash the issue with their usual influence. But the story gained traction, especially on platforms not controlled by Veronica's father. Soon, authorities launched a formal investigation. Stressed and overwhelmed, Thomas sought solace in Veronica, who dismissed his worries with a wave of her manicured hand. "Daddy has handled worse," she would say, applying lipstick in front of a gilded mirror. But Thomas sensed the shifting ground beneath his feet. He realized how deeply he had tethered himself to a family whose moral code matched, if not exceeded, his own questionable ethics. During this time, he occasionally spotted glimpses of Isabella on social media, holding their child, looking wearier but determined. Sometimes he felt a pang of regret, quickly smothered by the voice that insisted he had done the right thing for his future. He had left behind a burdensome existence, or so he convinced himself. Besides, with the massive settlement he had provided, Isabella and the baby were safe. He remained in denial about the emotional and psychological toll of his betrayal. But as the walls of scandal closed in, Thomas discovered that money alone could not shield him from consequences. Like a wildfire, rumors of Veronica's father's misdeeds spread, intensifying scrutiny on everyone in their circle. The perfect bubble Thomas had created began to show cracks, a dark omen of the bigger collapse on the horizon. The turning point came when federal investigators raided Veronica's father's corporate offices. Boxes of documents were seized, computers were forensically scanned, and a parade of executives was summoned for questioning. The once untouchable titan of media was now under the full glare of legal scrutiny, and everyone associated with the conglomerate felt the ripple effect. Veronica managed to keep her composure in public, but behind closed doors she was furious and frightened. Her father's legal team began to circle the wagons, cutting deals where possible and throwing lower-level employees under the bus to protect the family name. Thomas, who had inked a variety of partnership agreements with Veronica's father, found himself on the investigation's periphery. In some transactions, he was listed as a co-investor. He had also helped broker real estate deals for the conglomerate overseas. While he had never knowingly engaged in illegal activities, investigators wanted to determine if any of his deals were used to launder money or conceal assets. This threat of legal entanglement spooked Thomas's current investors, who began pulling out of projects citing market uncertainties. Suddenly, Thomas's financial empire started to shrink. Real estate deals fell through. Banks, wary of negative publicity, re-evaluated loan agreements and credit extensions. Lawsuits sprouted like mushrooms after a rainstorm, some legitimate, some opportunistic. The once shining star on the real estate stage now found himself struggling to keep afloat. The shift was swift, harsh, and terrifying. Veronica proved to be of little comfort. Busy defending her family's reputation, she spiraled into a vortex of panic and blame. When Thomas tried to discuss strategies to salvage his standing, she berated him for being too weak or afraid. She reminded him that, without her father's influence, he would never have ascended to such dizzying heights. Their relationship, founded on lust and opportunism, began to corrode under the weight of stress, legal fees, and public scrutiny. Bit by bit, Thomas sold off assets to stay solvent. He parted with the sports cars, the penthouse, and even withdrew from some prestigious clubs. The swirl of rumors about his unethical conduct, some rooted in truth, others wildly exaggerated, spread through the real estate circles like wildfire. Key allies deserted him. Invitations to influential gatherings dried up, replaced by cold shoulders and polite evasions. Thomas was forced to reduce his lavish lifestyle, trading in the plush penthouse for a smaller, more discreet apartment. Through the chaos, he never once reached out to Isabella. A stubborn pride held him back. He assumed she despised him for what he had done and felt too ashamed to beg for her understanding. She was now a distant memory, a reminder of the life he had forsaken, a life that had once been grounded in love and loyalty. Then, as if orchestrated by fate, an even harsher blow fell. The real estate market softened in key regions, exacerbating Thomas's financial woes. Properties he had once counted on to boost his portfolio were sitting unsold. Money that once streamed in like a raging river dried to a trickle. For the first time since his meteoric rise, Thomas faced a very real possibility: bankruptcy. Desperate, he tried to resurrect deals, calling old contacts, visiting them unannounced, practically begging for partnerships. But no one wanted the tainted man who was under the suspicion of federal investigators. Even though he was never charged with any crime, the stench of scandal lingered around him. And within that relentless downfall, he came to realize one brutal truth. He was alone, just as alone as he had left Isabella in that apartment with their newborn child. The final break with Veronica occurred when her father's legal case took a dramatic turn. Evidence emerged implicating him in bribery and tax evasion across multiple countries. The family's assets were frozen pending the investigation, forcing them to shut down lavish vacation homes and cancel expensive memberships. Veronica, enraged by the humiliation, lashed out at Thomas for not doing enough to contain the damage. When he reminded her he was also on the brink of financial ruin, she turned icy. One evening, after an especially volatile argument, Veronica packed her designer suitcases and left, spewing insults about Thomas's failure to protect her family. He didn't stop her. Deep inside, he recognized the end of a relationship built on falsehoods and lust for power. The swift departure left him with an echoing emptiness, but also a strange sense of relief. Perhaps now he could confront the reality he had been avoiding. A couple of weeks later, as the corporate meltdown continued, Thomas attempted to salvage the remnants of his business. He consulted lawyers, accountants, and crisis managers, but the damage was too extensive. Clients were gone, contracts terminated, his reputation lay in ruins. Eventually, Thomas had no choice but to declare bankruptcy. The opulent life he once considered his birthright vanished in a flurry of auctions and repossessions. His fancy suits were sold off, the last of his expensive watches claimed by creditors. In the end, he was left with a modest sum that barely covered rent in a tiny apartment on the outskirts of the city. He found himself in a surreal limbo once revered as a real estate genius. He was now scorned as a cautionary tale. No one returned his calls. The paparazzi, who once clamored for his photos at glamorous events, barely recognized him. And in the quiet hours of the night, as he stared at peeling paint on the walls of his new, humble residence, Thomas could only think of how he had ended up here. The puzzle pieces of his life, his family, his fortune, his pride were scattered and irreparable. During this period of reflection, his thoughts circled back to Isabella and their child. He had avoided any contact, fearing her contempt, but that gnawing regret in his chest had grown unbearable. He began to wonder about the baby he had abandoned, a son he had only held for a fleeting moment. Did he have his mother's gentle eyes? Was he learning to walk now? Had he spoken his first words, maybe mama or even dada, though Thomas had never been around? In a rare moment of clarity, Thomas realized the depth of his transgressions. He felt a compulsion, a moral imperative to seek forgiveness, though he knew he might never receive it. Summoning his courage, he decided to find Isabella. The weight of what he had done pressed heavily on him. He no longer had a fancy car or personal driver, so he took a train to the smaller neighborhood where Isabella now lived, guided only by an address he had gleaned from a friend of hers who pitied him. Standing outside a modest apartment building, Thomas hesitated, stomach churning. He felt undeserving of even seeing her face, let alone the child he had left behind. But he forced himself to climb the stairs and knock on her door. The hallway lights flickered with a dull hum, and for a moment he wondered if she would slam the door in his face. Part of him hoped she would, but what he found when the door finally opened would change his life yet again. Isabella stood in the doorway, her son, Thomas's son, clutching her leg. The boy had curly, dark hair and wide eyes that sparkled with curiosity. Isabella looked older, more worn, but there was a quiet strength in her posture. She regarded Thomas with a mixture of shock, anger, and something else, pity perhaps. A tense silence filled the air until the little boy, sensing an unfamiliar presence, shrank behind his mother. Thomas felt his throat tighten. He tried to say something, to explain himself, but the words stuck. Isabella was the first to speak. "What do you want?" she asked, voice thick with suppressed emotion. Thomas hesitated, tears already burning the corners of his eyes. He apologized, stumbling disjointed phrases, repeating how sorry he was, how he had made terrible mistakes. He confessed his downfall, his regret, the emptiness of the life he had chased. Through it all, Isabella's gaze remained steady, tears threatening but unfallen. Finally, she allowed him inside, if only so they could talk where the neighbors wouldn't eavesdrop. Thomas sat on a worn couch, noting the tidy but modest apartment. Toys were neatly arranged in a corner, bright plastic reminders of the boy's presence. He saw pictures on the wall, Isabella holding their son at various ages. Milestone photos, a first birthday, a trip to the park, and in every one, Thomas was absent. He poured out a litany of remorse, telling her how karma had slammed into him. Isabella listened in silence until the story ended. When he was done, he bowed his head, tears dripping onto the cracked laminate floor. Then he fell to his knees in front of her, a broken supplicant, and begged for her forgiveness. He pleaded for a chance to be part of their son's life, a chance to mend what he had destroyed. His voice trembled with desperation. Isabella's expression shifted between anger and heartbreak. She had spent countless nights crying over this man, cursing his name, wondering what she had done to deserve such betrayal. She had raised their son alone, fighting postpartum depression and financial strain, all while healing from a near-fatal childbirth. In those quiet hours she had imagined what she might do if he ever returned. Would she rage at him, slam the door? Would she spit in his face, or allow him a sliver of redemption. After an agonizing pause, she told him he could be in their son's life if, and only if, he demonstrated genuine repentance. He would start as a visitor, meeting the child on weekends, and he would have to respect her boundaries. Nothing more, nothing less. If he abused her trust or hurt their son in any way, she'd shut him out permanently. The guarded hope in her eyes warred with deep-seated pain. Thomas wept, relieved for even this narrow avenue back into his child's life. He turned to the boy, who looked at him with tentative curiosity. Thomas tried to speak, but all that came out was a choked, "I'm sorry." He realized no apology could return the stolen moments, the fatherly guidance his son never received, or the nights. Isabella cried herself to sleep, but in that moment, kneeling on the floor of her modest apartment, he silently vowed he would spend whatever remained of his life trying to make amends. Thomas's journey toward redemption was neither swift nor guaranteed. Initially, the child was wary of him, a stranger who appeared out of nowhere, looking disheveled and speaking softly. On those early visits, Thomas brought small gifts, though Isabella discouraged anything too extravagant. She wanted her son to build trust with his father through presence, not presents. So Thomas found himself squatting on the living room floor, stacking colorful building blocks, learning the names of cartoon characters he'd never heard of, and clapping enthusiastically when his son giggled for the first time in his presence. Financially, Thomas was still destitute. He took a job at a smaller real estate office, far from the glamour of Manhattan's elite. He started from scratch, assisting with rental listings and residential sales in middle-class neighborhoods, work he once would have scorned as beneath him. But he applied the same diligence and expertise that had once made him a millionaire, except this time he had a different motivation. Each humble paycheck went to covering his rent, child support, and the occasional extra for Isabella so she could give their son a better life. In the neighborhood, rumors circulated about the fallen real estate prodigy. Some recognized him and snickered, others offered sympathetic nods. But for the first time in his life, Thomas didn't care about public opinion. His focus lay solely on rebuilding trust with his family, what remained of it, and carrying himself with honesty and humility, qualities he had cast aside for far too long. As the weeks and months passed, a fragile rapport formed between Thomas and Isabella. They navigated the complexities of co-parenting cautiously. Some days were rocky, filled with old hurts and misunderstandings. Other days, they found unexpected comfort in shared memories, or the mutual joy of seeing their son achieve milestones, like the first time he spoke a full sentence or managed to ride a small tricycle without falling. Little by little, Thomas's new employer recognized his skill set, though he had tarnished his reputation in the larger sphere within this smaller company. His experience was invaluable. He closed modest deals, mostly involving apartments and single-family homes, but each success felt more genuine and hard-earned than his previous multi-million-dollar transactions. He earned just enough to keep afloat, yet the emptiness he once felt was gradually replaced by a sense of grounded satisfaction. One day, as he was leaving Isabella's place after a Sunday visit, she stopped him at the door. "I see you trying," she said quietly. "It doesn't erase what happened, and I'm not sure I can ever fully forgive you, but I can see you're trying to be there for our son. I appreciate that." Tears welled in Thomas's eyes. He nodded, managing only a whisper of thank you. Over time, he came to accept that real forgiveness, if it ever came, would be measured in years, not months, and manifested in consistent actions rather than flowery words. And so, with each building block he stacked, each bedtime story he read, and each sincere apology, Thomas took one more step away from the hollow illusions of wealth and status he once craved. he discovered that true riches lay in the relationships we nurture, the love we freely give, and the integrity we uphold even when no one else is watching. In time, he found a measure of peace, though the scars of his betrayal still lingered. He couldn't rewrite his past, but he could shape his present to ensure his son would never walk the same path. And in that conscious commitment, he found the redemptive power he had once thought only money could provide. Such is the story of Thomas Harrington, a man who soared to obscene wealth at the cost of family and morals, only to crash under the weight of his own choices. Through heartache and humiliation, he discovered that life's greatest treasures cannot be purchased. They are earned through loyalty, humility, and unconditional love. In the end, kneeling at the doorway of the very home he had forsaken, he learned a lesson more valuable than all the millions he once held. True wealth is found in the hearts we protect and the hands we hold through every storm. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of ambition, betrayal, and redemption. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Every click lets us keep telling tales that remind us all of life's most profound truths. We appreciate your support.